Hey, this is John Fernay, the co-host of the Maryland Crabs, and I am here today with a Maryland Crabcake for your listening pleasure. What's a crab cake? It's not quite a full episode, it's just a little snippet. Stay tuned and check it out. And make sure you check us out on themarylandcrabs.com. You can follow us on Twitter at MD Crabs Podcast or find us on Facebook at the Maryland Crabs Podcast. And don't forget, subscribe, rate us, iTunes. Go there now. Today we are talking with Glenn Fueston, and I did not screw up the name, so I'm pretty happy about that, who is the Executive Director of GoCaps, and that is an acronym that's been thrown out because the state loves to go with acronyms, and I just really recently realized that that had nothing to do with the hockey team that is probably not going back to the Stanley Cup again. GoCaps is the Governor's Office of Crime and Control Prevention. You are the Executive Director, and what exactly is the Governor's Office of Crime and Control Prevention?
So our office is responsible. First of all, let me say thank you for having me. I really appreciate being here.
I didn't have you. You came here.
That's true. Our office is set up to do several things. We administer grant funds is our primary purpose for the governor's office. So we get the federal funds that come from the federal government. We also get state funds that are focused on crime control and prevention efforts, and then we administer them back out to the community. So we get about 45 different funding sources into our office.
Okay.
And then produce about 800 sub-awards back out to local governments, nonprofits.
Now, is that through a year?
Yep, through a year. Every year we have about that many grants.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I mean, so your office is not. I mean, you're not arresting bad guys, and not. You're funding. You're giving the tools for people to do. And obviously, I'm assuming you've got some report backs.
Certainly.
You can't just give away that kind of money and not have.
Yeah, certainly. We definitely have accountability, which is big for the governor. I mean, governor really is pushing on accountability this year and for the past 4 years, matter of fact, on what are we doing with the taxpayers' money. So, no, we're not out in the street arresting people. I see my job, our job, as facilitating and allowing the police officers, men and women that are out in the streets, to do their jobs, do what they do best. But we also, it's important that we, the governor, have us focusing on multidisciplinary response. So we're working with enforcement, but we also do work with victim services and prevention as well.
Well, that's one of the neat things. I was looking at the website. I mean, just some of the stuff that you've recently done. I mean, you've got and I don't know whether it's bilingual, but trilingual or whatever, but you're funding alternative languages other than English.
Yep.
We'll call it bilingual, but I mean primarily Hispanic, I would think, in the area. When you get a crime victim that doesn't know how to communicate with the police, I mean, in Annapolis, we're fortunate enough that we do have an Hispanic liaison. Anne Arundel County is doing very well with that. But I mean, I imagine there's probably some areas of the state where you could certainly have an officer going, boy, speak some English. I can't understand you.
Right.
And this is the ability to, this is something that you could fund a position for, say, out in Garrett County or Allegheny County to have somebody that could respond and say, okay, well, let's translate.
Certainly. I think the governor's really pushed hard on the fact that we're not going to solve any of these crime issues by simply focusing on enforcement. We have to have the victim's voice in there. We also have to have a prevention effort in there. So a program like that, a translation service or a multilingual person, allows us to talk to the victim, make sure the victim is becoming more safe, becoming self-sufficient, and have access to information.
It's real difficult, and especially in family abuse and abuse of women and spousal abuse, which actually can go both ways. It doesn't necessarily need to be against a woman, but it can go to a man. And I know that you guys have helped fund the YWCA, which has a huge abuse outreach. They've got a new house that they just built in an undisclosed location, which is where it should be. But I know that for crime victims, you had recently funded them for like $500,000, and then there's some smaller ones that go out there as far as to fund that.
100%. We're really proud. I mean, when we talk about the YWCA in particular, Molly Knipe is a great friend, a great person in the community, and the governor has been very supportive there as well. He actually put money in his capital budget to help fund the new center, the undisclosed center, and we were there for the grand opening.
Right.
What a beautiful center. She does an incredible job. But reaching into victims such as domestic violence victims is one of the things that we're most focused on and trying to get out there. And again, we have three goals when it comes to victims. We want to make sure they're safe. that they become self-sufficient and they have access to information.
Well, that makes sense. With any kind of domestic violence, too, that tends to be a silent victim, as it goes with rape. I mean, a lot of the rapes are not reported. Was it my fault? Did I do something? Could I have done something different? And everything else. And there's to a degree, I guess there's some shame that goes with the victims, and any kind of resources that we can give them is the way to go.
Certainly.
What's the measurement of the success of your office? I mean, obviously you look at crime statistics.
Certainly.
And I imagine Baltimore. I'll say it. You can silently nod or stomp 3 times on the floor or something like that. But I've got to imagine Baltimore is a bit of a problem. You look at some of the statistics. You look at the murder rate that has been up there that doesn't seem to be appeasing at all. How does your office work with that and focus on that? I mean, can you justify giving money to an organization vis-a-vis Baltimore City that doesn't appear on one angle, and certainly from the most visible angle, to be working as well as it had been hoped?
Certainly. I think, to the bigger question, how do we measure our office? Our office's vision is a safer Maryland. So we're looking at any way that we can show that Maryland is safer. And I agree with you. Unfortunately, in Baltimore City, we see the homicide numbers, the violent crime numbers going up. And one of the things that the governor is really focusing on is that accountability piece. How we know how much money we give to Baltimore City. My office gives about $37 million a year to Baltimore City for victim services, prevention, and enforcement. And what we've instituted over the years is measurements. So we're looking at the outcomes that we're getting from those grants. Can we show direct impact?
Okay, so these are victims that have gone through the system, that have been, I don't want to say abused by the system, but have gone through. And as you said, they're looking to see that they're safe, they're accounted for, and they're moving forward.
Right, 100%. So they're victims, but then we also, for example, one of the things that the governor has in his budget is we fund 75 police officers in Baltimore City directly for community policing efforts. So we have 75 police officers, Baltimore City police officers, that the governor funds through our office for these police officers to be on the streets, working in neighborhoods, developing a relationship in those neighborhoods to try to reduce crime. So we're looking at those crime statistics as well. Can we measure the impact that they're having in the specific neighborhoods that they're focused?
Now, do you have a background in law enforcement yourself?
So my background, I spent 17 years in the federal government working on a federal task force for reducing drug trafficking in the United States.
Okay, so you're pretty well informed on that. Community policing, we hear that term an awful lot. I know Annapolis City right now is going through a big thing. They're looking for a new chief and everything else. And we hear community policing. You just brought it up for Baltimore. In your experience and from what you've seen, I mean, is that the key to making a safer city? I
think community policing is part of the solution. I think when we look down at the problem of violent crime or crime in general, I think what we have to understand is that not one discipline is going to be the answer. We can't look just to enforcement. We can't just look to prevention. We can't just look to these different areas. We have to look to come together and work together across the disciplines. And the community certainly plays a role in that. We just the governor met with some victims at the Roberta's house who provide services to homicide victims in Baltimore City. And one of the things that they identified is it has to start in the community. I can come in, I can provide whatever resources I can, money into the city, but if the community is not going to be behind it, it's going to be very difficult to make a change.
What would you say? We look at violent crime across the state and whatnot. And I'm not going to pinpoint what violent crime, but is there anything that you, in a magical world, could inject into our situation or remove from our situation that would make an immediate and sizable difference?
I think the immediacy is tough when you say the immediate and sizable. I think one of the things that the governor has done that is going to and has had made an impact is, again, looking at 3 different aspects. We have an enforcement program. We have a program called the Maryland Criminal Intelligence Network, which is bringing law enforcement agencies together. We have 13 sites around the state. They're all sharing information with the federal government, with state government, with local government. So they're doing a better job of identifying these violent criminal networks that are operating across the city to bring crime. But we're bringing behind that, we're bringing programs and sustainability. So when you go into a community, wherever it might be, as you mentioned, and you take out a gang, let's say it's MS-13 or the Bloods or the Crips,
right.
We have to bring services in behind that. So we're funding PAL centers, police athletic leagues, or boys and girls clubs right in behind that.
That's fantastic. Okay.
So I think that's going to be what makes this change. And then at the same time, we're providing services to the
Well, this is like when we go to war in some foreign land. We've got to rebuild it after we get out and figure out what's going on there.
Certainly.
What's the biggest crime that Maryland is facing on a statewide level right now, would you think?
The biggest crime, we're focused on violence.
I guess the biggest problem that
the biggest problem, certainly crime is there. The violent repeat offenders is a challenge, but opioids obviously are a big challenge for our state right now. And Steve Hsu, the executive director of the Opioid Operational Command Center, is doing a great job of driving that forward, but it's certainly a focus that we have to look at.
Right. Well, I know he established a Safe Stations program here in Anne Arundel County when he was county executive, and that was by all measurements a very good success. A couple sort of watershed moments when Steve was kicking that off. There was somebody that came into a fire station at the time. And I remember when Governor Hogan kicked off, and I'm going to screw up the name of the thing, but it's either the text or the phone line for safe schools,
yep.
like to report bullying or whatever it was. As he was announcing that, the first call had come in.
Right.
I mean, the opioid thing is huge, and it's interesting. And before we started recording, I told you that my daughter is down in North Carolina, and they don't have the heroin opioid problem. It's their drug of choice right now is meth. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm finding that as I read and learn more about it, that it is different places of the country. And Maryland tends to, for such a little itty-bitty state that everybody thinks Baltimore is the capital of,
right.
We rank right up there.
We do.
We don't have the population center that some of the other states have. We don't have, but we've got a really big problem. The CDC had some statistics on age of overdose deaths and the number of them in Maryland. And not so much that we've gone from, in 2014, we had 1,070 deaths statewide. In 2017, according to the CDC, had 2,247. So that's about doubled.
Yep.
And that's not shocking to me from what I know. But what this one did is that in 2014, the average age of the person who overdosed was 17.4 years of age. And today, or last in 2017, it's 36.3. So we've doubled the age of the people that are overdosing. Do you have any idea or any crystal ball as to why the users are getting older?
Well, I wish I had that crystal ball. If I had the crystal ball, it would make it a lot easier. I mean, I think the theory is that we have is, remember that Baltimore has been the heroin capital for a long time. Heroin has been in Baltimore City for 50 years or so.
Sure.
And I think that you have an aging population certainly there. But you also have the dynamics of changing with the opioids. How are opioids getting into the system? How are people becoming addicted to those opioids? Do you have older people that are on pain medicine and they're getting prescribed opioids, and that's creeping this age up? But you're 100% right. I mean, we've heard stories of people in adult communities that are trading opioids.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's real.
Well, I know that I had some knee surgery several years ago, about 5 years ago, and I left the hospital, and they were like, well, okay, here's a prescription for Percocet, here's a prescription for super duper Tylenol, there was something else, and they said, no, and here's a bunch of morphine for you. Mm-hmm. And, get ahead of the pain was what they told me. And I've never done any hard drugs, and I don't know that I'm not an addictive type of a person.
Right.
And that just, quite frankly, scared the shit out of me. Mm-hmm. And I took some opioids, some morphine when I got home, because they were saying that, and it felt tight in my chest. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I just don't like the feeling of this. And I said, okay, I'm just going to muscle through the pain. And it wasn't that bad. And I dealt with the Tylenol. But here's the hospital discharging me with, a pharmacy of opioids. Mm-hmm. And they all went to the police station in the drop boxes, which are, I'm sure that's probably in some way funded through you guys as far as being able to put the drop boxes at the police stations and fire stations. I think there are some libraries too in some places.
Yeah.
But I think that you look at that, I know that we had former Anne Arundel County State's Attorney Wes Adams, and he was saying the same thing, that when he was checked out from his, I think it was back surgery, he said, they warned me. They get a big warning. He said, you're going to be constipated. And he says, like, that's all? That's all you're giving me here?
Right.
And I know that we not been very successful in going after prescribers. There's been a couple success stories here and there, but prescribers, doctors, pharmacies that are filling it, and certainly we had not been very successful at going after the people that are dealing the drugs, securing convictions on that anyhow. So I don't know what the solution is, and it continues to grow. I mean, we're looking at the number of deaths, the number of overdoses, I believe, are down so far this year, but the number of deaths are still increasing.
Oh, I think it's important to look at what the threat is. And a lot of times when we look at the opioid problem, we look at drugs like Oxycontin, oxycodone, and those types of things. And if you roll back to the 14, 15 years, you were seeing deaths from heroin that were going up. The deaths from heroin are actually going down now. And what the death rate that's going up is fentanyl. So they brought this synthetic opioid into this mix.
And I remember Lieutenant Governor Rutherford had said that the latest cocktail is cocaine with fentanyl.
Yeah. And that's scary. I mean, that's a speedball. I mean, that's an up and a downer bringing together two drugs that are just dangerous. And these fentanyl, when you're mixing it in, you have to remember that fentanyl is extremely potent and extremely...
Well, it's lethal.
Yeah, lethal. And it's not a chemist that's mixing it together. So it's some guy that's standing in front mixing cocaine.
Well, he's looking at me. I mean, and the reason that they're mixed, and you probably could address this, but I mean, in my ignorance here, but the reason that they're mixed is because profit. Yeah, right. I mean, I've got a product, cocaine or heroin or whatever, that's worth $100, whatever it is. But if I throw some fentanyl, which gives you the same buzz or whatever it is that I can buy for a nickel, I can put that in and
100%. I mean, from the distributor side, they're looking for the profit. But I tell you what we heard in the community, and it actually was right in this community when we did a case several years ago with Anne Arundel County, is the guys, the users were looking for the good shit. Excuse my language, and the good shit was the drugs with the fentanyl, in it, because it's a higher high. And they were looking for it. So they were actually hearing people die and flocking to that area in order to get that drug.
You know what I would love to see some organization do, and I pitched this to Wes Adams, and it was problematic. I pitched it to every cop I've talked to, and so I'll pitch it to you, and maybe you can go to Governor Hogan. But there's such a prevalence of people saying, oh, my kid would never do that. Mm-hmm. I mean, you've got the whole thing that, again, County Executive Steve Shue had, the Not My Child programming that's out there. And it is your child. And don't, when I was, I think I'm older than you, but when I was young, I mean, we heard about heroin and we heard about, those nasty drug dealers, the crack dealers, they're living on the corners, homeless in Baltimore, dealing with the bad people and everything else. And it never really hit mainstream America, right. Whether it was lower middle class, upper middle class, or upper class. Now it knows no bounds. There is, and I mean, I knew nobody that was outwardly addicted. Mm-hmm. Now I've got probably a dozen friends that have either lost children, have lost siblings, that their neighbors have. I mean, it's really hitting home. And I would love to see a public program that sit there and say, where you could send somebody out, start a time clock up behind the speaker, mm-hmm. and say, okay, I'll be back as soon as I score some heroin. Now, obviously, we've got some legal issues there that you've got to give the guy that was selling it a break, and you got the guy that possesses it. But I think that it would be a great way to look. There was a guy from the FBI that I remember when my kids were very little was talking about online porn and, mm-hmm. and predators and stuff like that, and he knew all the places to go, which the predators do as well. And as he was sitting here talking, he's going on Yahoo Chat, and he just asked somebody in the audience, said, hey, who's got a kid that might be online here, and what's his first name? That was the only information he was given, and it went there, boom, identified, found the kid, got a last name, did a little bit more Googling and looking at this and this and this, and he says, okay, well, here's what I know. I said, your name is Frank. I didn't ask you that before. Your wife's name is Mary. You gave $100 to the Booster Club. You get home at 3 o'clock. You work here. Your dog's name's Fluffy, and your kid wears number 8 playing soccer. Inside of about a 20-minute period. But to be able to turn around and do that and have somebody come back in and say, yeah, here's my baggie of heroin. You do it in an affluent community up in, whether it be Severna Park or into Davidsonville or into Bethesda or Chevy Chase or wherever it may be. I think it would just be such an eye-opener because so many people are in denial that it's somebody else's kid that's little Tommy's the bad kid, not my little Frankie.
Right. I certainly agree. I think that one of the things we have to do is we have to remove that stigma around it. One is we have to get people talking about it so that we can have that conversation with my child. I have a 14-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter, and I have these conversations with them regularly. And I agree with you 100%. A lot of people don't think it's here. I mean, and I just looked at some statistics statistics. I mentioned the Maryland Criminal Intelligence Network that the governor put forth, and just in Anne Arundel County and Annapolis for the last year, they've identified 13 drug trafficking organizations. So a drug trafficking organization is an organization with 5 or more members that is trafficking drugs either locally, multi-state, or internationally. Just in Anne Arundel County and Annapolis, there's 13 of them.
13 groups. And that could be a group of 5 or it could be a group of 105.
100%. And there's ties. We see the ties. In addition to that, we see, 15 gangs that are operating. We know gangs that are operating here. They're usually known for distribution of drugs in the community. We look at firearms trafficking. We look at human trafficking. This is in Anne Arundel County. This isn't in L.A. This isn't in New York City. This is right here in our neighborhood.
That's terrifying. Is there any one particular group? I mean, I know that MS-13 tends to be largely Hispanic. Mm-hmm. Are they, do we have white groups and black groups and Hispanic groups and Asian groups? I mean, is it going all across the board?
Certainly. I don't know the exact breakdown of all of the gangs off the top of my head, but certainly MS-13 has a presence here. There's a presence of several other gangs, and they're impacting our community and driving it forward. I mean, right here in Annapolis, there is gang presence.
The city and the county have worked together, and they've done as good of a job. I don't want to say as good of a job as they can, because that makes it sound like that they couldn't do more. But with what they've got, they're doing a good job. I think it's just very difficult to get ahead of it.
Certainly.
There's an awful lot of incentive for the gangs to continue on and to move on.
Certainly, and I think the other thing that for the community to understand, and it's a hard balance sometimes, is that these investigations take us a long time. So I know for a fact that Anne Arundel County and Annapolis City have done investigations that are month-long investigations that have taken them out of the country. So, you're looking at, the county police or the city police that are now investigating, with our federal partners into other countries. So these aren't just very quick arrests.
It's a tough one.
It is.
It's a tough one. And you're tasked with this. So, this is kind of a heady job description you've got.
It is.
You've got there.
I love it, though. I got a great boss.
What are the success stories out of the GoCaps program?
I think that one of the biggest successes that we have in GoCap is that we're opening the communication lines between disciplines. When I got into the law enforcement field, and I want to make it very clear, I've never been a sworn law enforcement officer. I've never been brave enough to be one of them, but I've always been in a support role. I've run intelligence operations and the like. But when I got engaged about 20 years ago, you didn't see the communication between law enforcement and victim services and public health and the like. And I think what you've seen from Governor Hogan and Lieutenant Governor Rutherford is we've brought those communities together and said, you're going to talk. We're going to work together. And that's one of the things that we pride ourselves in our office. As I've mentioned, we're dealing with enforcement, victim services, and prevention. And if we can bring those entities together and have public health talk to public safety and talk to the victim services world, I think we're going to come up with a better solution. I think that's one of the biggest wins.
Makes sense. I know you get rid of the jurisdictional stuff, and it's. I know I was a volunteer firefighter at one point. It was you have an accident on the line, and somebody's in the car needing to get cut out, and the firefighters are fighting about which
right.
whose call it is,
right.
Because they want the check mark or something like that. But I think that some of the data that's coming out of not just your office, but the state in general. There's an awful lot that's out there to analyze. It's almost too much, but it's whatever you want to make of it. You've got enough opportunity to make of it. Mm-hmm. You look at the crime statistics that have moved, and I think generally the crime has gone down in the last couple of years, not by leaps and bounds, and that would be a general crime. Certainly there's other ones. I know murder tends to be up a little bit, yep. But that can I would probably attribute a good portion of that to Baltimore City and the problems that they have operating under their the agreement that they've got, and the upheaval they have with their police commissioners.
Certainly.
What's next?
I think that what's next for us is to continue that collaboration. So if we can continue to keep people talking, and John, you mentioned the data. One of the things that the governor's really having us focus on is making sure that we're utilizing evidence-based principles, that we are funding programs that we know work and we can show that work. So as we can use data to show that we're having an impact, I think that that's going to continue to grow. In order to get to that spot, we need people sharing data. We need people collaboration and trusting one another so that we can move that forward. So I think that's what you're going to see more of, this collaboration.
Data is fascinating to me. Mm-hmm. The website for you can just sort of Google it, or it's under the Governor's Office of
Crime Control and Prevention. Yep.
You've got crime reports by county, by jurisdiction, by state, by types of crime. so you can actually see exactly what's there. You can see all of the grants that you're doing, all of the people that are the beneficiaries of your grants, and I think it's been very, very transparent, both certainly through your department as well as in the administration in general. When was this established? Was this the governor's office of coordinating office? Was this established under Hogan, or was this something that had been around for?
So the governor's office of crime control and prevention actually was established back in 1995. So our office has been around for a long time. We're actually a collaboration between two separate entities that they brought together in 1995. And since then, I think you've seen the office change. Under Governor Hogan, we talked about the grants that we do, but we also do a lot of facilitation and collaboration of projects. The governor has started projects like Handle with Care, the Maryland Criminal Intelligence Network, and those types of programs that we're driving forward. So you're seeing more of the collaboration through programming as well.
Glenn Fueston, who is the executive director of the Governor's Office of Crime Governor's Office of Crime
Control and Prevention.
Yep. You are tasked with keeping tabs on crime in the state of Maryland and reallocating resources to where they need to go the best.
That's what we do. Thank you.
Doing a hell of a job.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
This has been the Maryland Crabs podcast with Tim Hamilton and John Fernay. Sure to follow them in all the regular places, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and online at themarylandcrabs.com. Take a moment to rate us on iTunes. Now, get the hell out of my kitchen. Seriously, go!
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.